It's almost summer.
We can all just go home now. What are you saying? That was amazing. Someone was saying on Facebook they hope that I did the Sid Vicious version of that in the service today. Our opening words this morning are from Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed. This is from a talk he gave called After Running Through Thistles, the Hard Part Begins. This is an essay about leaving a parish where one has been for a long time, and this was recommended to me as reading by Megan as a helpful guide to working through some of those feelings that come from that. He writes, "Running through thistles, terminating a ministerial relationship with a parish," is an essay written by Alban Institute consultant Roy Oswald. Roy recounts that when he was a young boy growing up in rural Saskatchewan, the quickest way home from school was over the fields. It was shorter, but occasionally we would come upon enormous thistle patches. He and his older brothers either had to walk around or find the narrowest gap and sprint across. He writes, "I can still vividly remember the experience, running full speed in bare feet across 20 feet of prickly thistles, yelping in pain all the way through. At the end, there were always a few thistles stuck in his feet, but the ordeal was over." This, Oswald claims, is how many of us manage our departure from a congregation. We deal with our farewells by steeling ourselves, then plunging in. We know it is going to hurt, so we rush full tilt ahead, hoping to get it over with. The image of running through thistles is catchy. We can see ourselves yelping and hollering as we sprint through leave-taking, accepting a little pain but avoiding the hard and prolonged work grief requires. I prefer the image of waves to that of thistles, waves upon the ocean. I can see us ministers rolling along, one following the next. As we rise above the ocean and into consciousness of ourselves, it sometimes seems as if we are alone, but we are not. We are a part of the Unitarian Universalist tradition. There are moments when we know this. It comes to us during the service of the living tradition when, in the reading of the names from the past and the future, history is compressed. Yet remember, you were never the water, only a wave. Not substance, but a form substance assumed. You were never the tradition, only a voice through which it spoke and loved. Please join me in our first hymn, number 358, Rank by Rank. Again, we stand.
And we join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And stay on your feet and turn and greet somebody you may not know. Oh, that's enough of that. Knock it off. Stop that. Enough, enough, enough. You know, starting with my way, I was about to order a scotch and soda. And then rank by rank, you know, what Josh was recalling is that rank by rank is sung at the service of the living tradition at General Assembly. And you have 4,000 people belting that song out, and it is really a stirring moment. Welcome. Good morning. Welcome if you're here for the very first time. Welcome if you've been here forever. It is good to be here together. It is Memorial Day weekend. How many of you are going to fire up the grill at some point over the weekend? Yes, the grill will be fired up. Does anybody go to visit the cemetery? Does anybody go to the cemetery? There are some that go to the cemetery. I remember as a kid growing up, we would drive with geraniums in the trunk and trowels to the cemetery, and we would trim around the family graves. And then in the afternoon, with some aunts that were about 110 years old, we would have a picnic out of big old wicker picnic baskets, and my cousin Jean would infuriate her mother by jumping into the creek with all of her clothes on, and we would find ways of getting in trouble. We'd also listen to the Indianapolis 500. Did you have that tradition? You'd hear that screaming as the cars would go around the corners, and you'd wonder if there was going to be a crash. Some days I get confused of whether I'm in church or at Prairie Home Companion. Again, welcome. I really can't think of much of anything to announce this morning. This indeed is Josh's swan song, and we're going to miss Josh an awful lot. And it's been very good to have you with us. All right, get back to work, Josh. It's back to you.
Hi, Bunny. I have some kind of sad news to tell you. See, I'm moving. I'll be away for, well, a long time. I know this can't be easy to hear, and it must be really devastating and all to hear that I'm going away.
Huh? Oh, Blue, you were saying something? Sorry, I was listening to some music. What's up?
Well, I was just saying that my family's moving.
Oh, moving, gee. But you're still going to live close by, right?
No, we're moving pretty far away.
Yeah, but you'll still be going to our school, right?
No, it's a different school.
Okay, but you'll be able to visit a lot, right?
Well, not as much as I'd like.
Okay, but I'll still see you all the time, right?
No, Bunny, you know, I'm moving. What's so hard to understand about that?
Oh, you're moving. But what happens if I miss you?
Well, I don't know. It might be hard.
What happens if I want to play with you and you're not home?
Well, I won't be at home because I won't live there anymore.
But what happens if I'm sad?
I don't know, Bunny. You'll figure something out.
Oh, you're right. Good call. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna go now.
Yep, bye.
And I may not be back for a long time, long time. Having to see you. Bunny, can we go back to you missing me? I actually kind of like that.
Oh, well, sure, Blue. Of course, I'll miss you, and I'll be sad for a while. But then I got to thinking about how much we could still see each other. Sometimes, even if not as much as before.
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking about how we could also talk on the phone and FaceTime.
Right.
And I was really thinking about how I still have that friendship box that you made me, and that will be here, even if you've moved away. And when I'm really missing you, I can look inside the friendship box and think of you.
Oh, yeah. Now I can look in my friendship box from you.
Yeah.
By the way, you want to go play at my house? My parents are just putting things in boxes, and it's really boring.
Boxes? I love boxes. Boxes are great.
Okay, let's go. Oh, look. Kids and RE leaders will adjourn to the common room for ingathering. The rest of us will sing our second hymn, number 22, Dear Weaver of Our Life's Design. This reading is from the great community organizer Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. This comes from his description of the ideal community organizer, and I think it applies pretty well to ministers also. It is difficult for you to surrender that little image of God created in our own likeness, which lurks in all of us and tells us that we secretly know what's best for the people. A successful organizer has learned emotionally as well as intellectually to respect the dignity of the people with whom they are working. Thus, an effective organizational experience is as much an educational process for the organizer as it is for the people with whom they are working. They both must learn to respect the dignity of the individual. And they both must learn that in the last analysis, this is the basic purpose of organization in the first place. for participation is the heartbeat of the democratic way of life. We learn when we respect the dignity of the people that they cannot be denied the elementary right to participate fully in the solution to their own problems. To give people help while denying them a significant part of the action contributes nothing to the development of the individual. In the deepest sense, it is not giving, but taking someone's dignity. Finally, the organizer is constantly creating the new out of the old. They know that all new ideas arise from conflict, that every time humanity has had a new idea, it has been a challenge to the sacred ideas of the past and the present. Curiosity, irreverence, imagination, sense of humor, a free and open mind, and acceptance of the relativity of values and of the uncertainty of life all inevitably fuse into the kind of person whose greatest joy is creation. This person conceives of creation as the very essence of the meaning of life. This is the basic difference between the leader and the organizer. Leaders go on to build power to fulfill their desires, to wield power for purposes both social and personal. They want power for themselves. The organizer finds their goal in creation of power for others to use. Friends, if you want to be part of the action and wield your own power, freely we have received. Freely let us give. To support the good work of this congregation here and far beyond these walls, the offering will now be gratefully received. This sermon is titled Josh's Swan Song, 4 Lessons About Life and the Ministry from my 2-year internship. There were probably more lessons than that, but I'm working on the whole brevity thing. The summer of 2015, when I started my internship here was a time of great hopefulness in my life. I was finally coming out of 3 long years of divinity school, which I did right after my 4 years of college. And during much of the last few years of that process, I had started to feel directionless. As I approached graduation, I was feeling very tired of being a student, but having not been anything else since the first day of kindergarten, I didn't have the slightest idea what I would like to be instead. I had very little confidence in my ability to find a job on the education I had just received, and I know that at least some members of my extended family shared that skepticism. I felt that my life had been spent as an absorber of knowledge and resources, and that I hadn't done much yet to justify the investment. But just as I was approaching commencement day in spring 2015, at which time I assumed the bell would sound at midnight and I'd be turned into an ordinary pumpkin again, a number of things mysteriously started to work out. An email I sent to First Parish in Bedford yielded the reply that actually they were still interested in interviewing potential student ministers. An application for what I was then expecting to be a part-time summer internship at UUSC found me taking my first real employment in the human rights sector. A call to clergy to join Reverend William Barber in Winston-Salem for a massive voting rights march found my dad and me driving south for what is probably the closest equivalent to a freedom summer that I will ever experience. It was a season of daydreams for me. I spent hours stretched on the floor of my first single apartment, listening to Bill Clinton's My Life on audiobook, and thinking what a better Bill Clinton I would be in my own ascent to glory. That's what summers are good for, more so than other seasons. Because when it came to an end, I was suddenly faced with the prospect that now I had to actually do all of the work that I had just committed myself to. And in particular, I had to get up and talk in front of all those people and somehow seem like I knew what I was doing. In my second or third service here at First Parish that August, I think we only made it about halfway through the prelude before I did the one thing that I'd just been warned 7 or 8 times not to do. Namely, I turned off the mic without first turning off the sound system. Or maybe it's the other way around. This is why this is hard to remember. Whatever I did, the common room was immediately flooded by the most horrible sound of shrieking static imaginable. And I stumbled out of the AV closet trailing mops and brooms and saying sorry, while people clutched at their ears. During my early services in the sanctuary, I was so nervous that I would close my eyes and count up to 10 and back again during every welcome and announcements. My greatest fear was not that I would freeze up or lose my words or say the wrong thing. No, what I truly dreaded in my heart of hearts was that one of these days I was going to get up there, start in on my part of the service, and immediately throw up. I don't know how that one even occurred to me. I guess it seemed like just the sort of cruelly ironic thing that would happen at the start of my internship and follow me ever after. All I had to do was read opening words. I would ruefully tell my grandchildren, "How hard is that?" But when I opened my mouth, guess what came out instead? This wasn't entirely helped by the fact that John has occasionally displayed a kind of sinister intuition in this matter, sending a text to Megan and me after a service, if he has been away, bearing the question, "How did it go? Did anybody vomit?" So far, no one has, to my knowledge. Not that it actually would be the end of the world if they did. People would probably help me off the chancel and clean up the mess and share a laugh about it afterward. But at that point, I didn't yet know the full generosity of spirit of this place. I didn't know at what point I might simply be cast out and told never to return. And maybe that's okay, because it kept me on my toes. Reflecting on this leads me to the first of my 4 lessons that I learned in my 2-year internship. Lesson number 1 is that it's not always such a bad thing to be nervous, especially in the ministry. For one thing, it sets the bar pretty low. All I had to do in those early services was not throw up, and once I'd done that, I was pretty pleased with myself. The times when I found myself messing up in this role have almost never been when I was most anxious. Moderate anxiety is a sharpener and focuser of the mind, and ministry requires a willingness to keep oneself in a certain state of tension. One thing you notice early on in this role is that it doesn't matter how many times you've gotten something right in the past. The real question is always, how is it going to go this time? Ministry is, for better or worse, one of the ephemeral arts, like a network broadcast that is transmitted live. When I have slipped up as an intern here, it was far more often due to overconfidence or a belief that I could allow myself to relax that tension. In my second summer here, during the first of the August services, I strode in thinking that by this point, I could do it in my sleep. I quickly realized it was harder to come up with welcome and announcements on the spot than I remembered. Ministry requires keeping a firm grip on the wheel, lest the sea sweep you off in another direction. One interruption in the routine sets off a chain of further consequences. 4 weeks away from the end of your internship, you may be tempted to believe, for instance, that somehow, with so little time left to go, the ordinary laws of dry cleaning will no longer apply. Of course you will still have clean and freshly pressed clothes to wear when you open your closet door Sunday morning. But lo, the dry cleaning gods have moved on. The frantic search through the hamper for something still modestly wearable yields lateness, which yields haste, which yields a lack of morning coffee, and the problems pile on from there. No, you have to keep on top of things in the ministry. That's a bit of a harsh truth, but it is balanced by another. Because it so happens that no matter how white-knuckled a grip you keep on yourself as a minister, you will still manage to screw up. And this is where lesson number 2 comes in handy. It is as follows. When you do make mistakes, just remember that all of your insecurity, awkwardness, embarrassment, and humiliation can actually be turned to your advantage. To achieve this magical result, the great alchemy is humor, combined with the ability to say you're sorry. People will forgive a great deal if you're capable of finding the humor in yourself and, in more serious matters, to be able to offer a sincere apology. If I had appreciated this fully at the front end of my internship, I might not have spent so many moments of terror in the front pew in those first months. If, as the new student minister, I had actually thrown up on the chancel the first time I opened my mouth, it would have made quite a story for future sermons. I would just have to make sure that I became the curator of that story. If anyone is going to take out and display one's more embarrassing episodes, it is always better that it be oneself. I began to learn this early on in my internship, and I dare to say that one ministerial art in which I have achieved genuine competence since then is that of the self-deprecating personal anecdote. I recall one Sunday this past winter when both John and Megan were away. When I woke up the morning of a service in which I was scheduled to preach, I managed to get dressed and have breakfast and be entirely ready to go, all before I came to the horrifying recollection that I had gotten a ride home from dinner the previous night from someone else, and had therefore left my car overnight in the Wellington Station parking garage at the end of the Orange Line, a 20-minute flat-out run from my apartment. As I sprinted over there that morning in my Sunday best, 2 thoughts kept going through my mind. The first was the drumbeat of options I might pursue if I found the parking garage closed when I got there, or if my car had been towed in the middle of the night, including every one of the limited number of First Parish phone numbers I had stored on my device. Call a taxi, call Judy Curcio, call Diana Feiner, call Christine Dudley Marling was the chant going through my head. But the second thought, never far from the first, was, oh well, Once I get there, at least now I've got a good story for welcome and announcements. I had been searching up to then for a hook, and here it was. So that's lessons 1 and 2. Both, as you can see, are strategies for forestalling and managing difficulties that arise in ministry. There are also times, however, as in any profession, where all one's craft and strategy are still not enough. Sometimes things happen that are just really hard. And if I could go back and advise my summer of 2015 self about what he should do to prepare for those moments, I don't think I would tell him to shy away. But I would tell him never to feel trapped by those moments of real difficulty, but to approach them as challenges that he could just as easily have avoided, but that he is choosing to undertake because they serve a goal that matters to him. I recall something that was once said along these lines by a British vegetarian I knew in school. He was being taunted over lunch by a carnivorous classmate of ours who was shaking a cheeseburger under his nose and saying, "Ha ha, you can't have this." "I can have it," the vegetarian replied with devastating wit. "I just choose not to because it's horribly, horribly immoral." That's lesson number 3 in sum. It is to always remember and respect your own moral freedom. Don't ever believe that you have to be a minister or any other job because you don't. If you do stay on in the ministry or in a particular role, it's because you made a choice that morning to do so, a choice that you could reverse that afternoon or sooner. And it is paradoxically this very ability to give ourselves permission to leave that often enables us to carry on in moments of greatest crisis. It is the reminder that we have the agency to refuse to do something that allows us to go ahead and do it. I've been struck more than once in my life by the fact that things that I thought my parents really wanted me to do were the things I found it utterly impossible to do. Whereas as soon as I realized that my parents had given up hope of trying to convince me to do it, I was able to do it. Most of the times I've ever taken any decisive step in matters educational or professional would fall into this category. There is a passage in a Philip Roth novel in which a young woman seeks advice on her career path from her 2 parents. Quote, "Her mother was sure to tell her to forge ahead, which would leave her overwhelmed and feeling trapped. With her father, there was the possibility that if she made a compelling case against her own persevering, he would tell her that, if she wished, she could cut her losses and quit, which would, in turn, give her the gumption to go on." A convenient handle for this 3rd lesson was provided to me by a list of advice about maintaining healthy professional boundaries that John once handed me, which was written by Reverend Ken Hurto. One of the items on the list read simply, "Keep your bags packed." What it meant was maintain a level of emotional detachment from your professional role. Don't let your job become your life, because this will actually deter you from being able to take the risks that you will need to take in order to do your job well. You may recall that this advice provoked a sermon from me last year on the subject of Mary Poppins as the ideal minister, since her bags are so completely packed that she can float off with her umbrella at a moment's notice. In that service, I focused almost exclusively on the reassuring aspect of this notion of keeping one's bags packed. It's helpful to remember, after all, that you do have the power to leave if you choose. As I approach the end of my internship, however, the much more emotionally trying aspect of this good advice also comes to the fore. Because the other reason to keep your bags packed is that one day, eventually, you are going to have to leave. This is all the more true if you are a student minister here for a defined 2-year commitment. And the advice is all the more bitter when the place one is leaving is First Parish. I knew this going in, of course. It's very much part of the deal, and at least one can say that it's probably easier to leave some place where you've only been for 2 years than some of the longer ministerial placements that come later in one's career. But even in this brief period of time, I have gotten to be intensely attached to this place. I couldn't help it. It wasn't playing fair on First Parish's part for you all to be such an unusually fun and vibrant internship site. Where else could I have been a zombie elevator operator, a puppeteer, an answerer of owl question box questions such as, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? And a teacher of all the wackier passages of the Bible, even the parts where God tries to kill Moses and where Onan is struck dead for failing to impregnate his brother's widow, and somehow gotten away with calling all of that work. This congregation has obviously been a big part of my life, to put it mildly, and a good part too. As my parents once remarked after paying a visit here, this congregation is so supportive. They have spent a lot of time in different congregations, in different parts of the country. There was perhaps an implied comparison underlying these words. The advice to just put out my umbrella and float away on the breeze is suddenly seeming a lot harder than I thought. But the last of the 4 lessons I have learned is that there is a time when one has to leave nonetheless, even though it is hard. There comes a point at which to stay on in a particular role is appealing to one's sense of ego, but would not ultimately serve the larger goals for which we come together in community in the first place. And it is the latter that has to be given priority. Perhaps the most rewarding illustration of this truth for me during my internship came from my work with the Sanctuary Task Force. It was immensely gratifying to me from the start to be a part of the Sanctuary project and to see the interest it received from others. Not only is sanctuary an issue that matters to me a great deal, it was also something specific I could point to in my internship when I was feeling down, to say that here perhaps was a seed that I had helped to plant that might blossom into something lasting, even if the soil, water, and nutrients were provided by others. There was definitely a period not that long ago, however, when it was not looking like it was going to work out in accordance with our hopes. For much of the last year, the task force lacked a stable meeting schedule and lay leadership, which left me as the nominal convener of our sessions. This is a situation that no committee should ever be in. I flatter myself that I possess certain abilities, but organizing anything more complicated than a suitcase is not one of them. We've already heard today about my issues with dry cleaning. So you can imagine that remembering to book a meeting room with Joan every week and printing a thorough agenda were often things that got done too late in the game, if they got done at all. Added to this was the fact that I had just started a full-time job at UUSC, and in order to get to Bedford by 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night, required an impossible fight through traffic and construction that could easily last 2 hours. By the sheer fact of incapacity and the knowledge that I would have to leave one way or the other at the end of the year, I began to step back from the leadership of the Sanctuary Task Force. It was a perilous moment in which I feared that the whole group might unravel. We wouldn't ever get the vote on the measure itself. But instead, something miraculous occurred. The necessary leadership materialized in the form of Christine and Vito. All of a sudden, I'd show up for a Wednesday night meeting and an agenda would already be printed and a list of action steps, and none of it came from me. Members of the congregation were leading on this and doing a much better job of it than I could have done. Sanctuary was no longer the half-baked scheme of an outside agitator, but something that had real life in our community. To get to that point required admitting to myself that it was okay to step back, that the whole project did not depend on me, and in fact, that this was a good thing. It meant putting the success of Sanctuary itself, the cause for which we had come together, above my own need to feel needed. And while for a time I felt that this must be proof of my inadequacies as a community organizer, I was gratified to see later in reading Saul Alinsky that this is exactly how it is supposed to go. at least according to him. For Alinsky, the true test of the organizer is not whether they can step into the role of leadership, but whether they know when it is time to bow out. While it may be neither possible nor desirable to ask organizers to surrender all sense of personal pride in their work, the work demands that they be able to take pride in seeing collective endeavors carry on without them, rather than investing their sense of self in being the center of attention. He writes, quote, "No would-be organizer, or minister we could add, afflicted with egotism can avoid hiding this from the people with whom they are working. Nothing antagonizes people and alienates them from a would-be organizer or minister more than the revealing flashes of arrogance, vanity, impatience, and contempt of a personal egotism. This is what sets apart the true organizer from the mere leader. The ego of the organizer is stronger and more monumental than the ego of the leader. The leader is driven by the desire for power, while the organizer is driven by the desire to create. The organizer is, in a true sense, reaching for the highest level for which human beings can reach, to create, to be a great creator. They conceive of creation as the essence of life. The leader goes on to build power to fulfill their desires. The organizer finds their goal in creation of power for others to use." Much the same applies to ministers. The minister at last needs to be an organizer in Alinsky's sense, rather than a leader. A minister must be able to prioritize the goal of building the power of humanity to create a more just and compassionate world over any sense of personal prestige. They need to place the values of this denomination, which are the reason that we ordain ministers in the first place, above their attachment to any one position, congregation, or office. As Mark Morrison Reed puts it in describing the tragic fine print of ministry, the minister often has to die to the congregation when they leave, so that the ministry might live. This is a tall order, and it is far and away the hardest of the 4 lessons I am discussing in this sermon. But it is one that all of us, not just ministers, must try to teach ourselves in our search for life's meaning. While not everyone is faced with the heartbreak of having to leave a beloved congregation, we all, of whatever profession, will one day have to leave the congregation of humanity, the community of this planet. Our individual selves will not last forever. To eventually make our peace with our mortality, we must find meaning in the continuity of the larger human family of which we are a part. We must find an affection for life itself, and a fierce willingness to protect it over and above our life as individual beings. We must delight in the creation and enrichment of life for others, because that is the true immortality. Ministry, it turns out, is a good preparation, among other things, for living, which is a bold statement, but it's hard for me to overstate the gift that this congregation has given to me over the past 2 years. I leave you with my sincerest blessings for the journey ahead, for all of our future partings and beginnings, and for human life itself, which ends for every one of us, but which for all of us is endless. May it be so. Please join me in our closing hymn, number 337, "Have I Not Known," sung to the tune of "And Did Those Feet," if you know that one. Our closing words are adapted from William James' Varieties of Religious Experience. These are also the closing words I used in the first ever sermon I preached here at Bedford, so I offer them as a way of coming full circle. Sometimes books and words and people come to one's awareness just at the very moment when one needs them. Sometimes one glides over great dangers as if with shut eyes. Sometimes the paths on which one ought not to wander are, as it were, hedged off with thorns. Sometimes, on the other side, great obstacles are suddenly removed. Sometimes a thing occurs to us at just the right moment, just as it ought to do. Sometimes persons come to us at the right time to offer what we would never have had the courage or resolution to undertake on our own. Sometimes the highest resources of human cunning are unable to attain that which comes of its own accord. Amen. Blessed be.
you.